subscribing and leaving comments.
They both felt that the Bigfoot were gesticulating and gesturing to each other, as well as speaking in a gibberish. He called it an apish whisper, with the very word. Another unusual report was a night guard at a foliage plants nursery that probably some of the plants that decorate the university here and maybe even in your own homes came from, since Florida produces foliage plants for the whole nation. This man was a night guard, and he was grabbed by a Bigfoot, escaped, turned around and shot at it with a shotgun. And he believed, he stated that it was 10 feet tall. An additional sighting occurred only 8 miles from my own home, and caught me a bit by surprise. It involved a man striking a Bigfoot with a car, which is a rather rare phenomenon. It's only, I know of only 2 cases. There may be additional ones. Both in Florida, by the way, and both in the same year, which is rather a bit of a coincidence. But he was driving at 1 a.m. in the morning to go see his new baby to Gainesville, and he struck it and got out of the car with the .38 Special and shot at it 5 times. And he claimed he was a marksman, and he believes he hit it, but to no avail. Another interesting sighting occurred in South Florida, and that was in 1972. And Mrs. King told me that not only did she feed a Bigfoot, she actually stroked and petted what she called a baby Bigfoot, but which I believe was probably an adolescent, not a baby. It turns out that my most important sighting, report of all, was one that started out very routinely, and which I thought did not really have any potential for anything unusual. I found it, as I often do, because a friend mentioned it, and I got the newspaper article, and it stated that a hitchhiker had been hitchhiking home from work and had seen a Bigfoot. I called the reporter, and this individual wanted to remain anonymous. He didn't want his name connected with the story. I was later to find out that the reason there was that he was living at home. He was 22, and he didn't want his father to throw him out of the house because he was afraid to be connected to such a, quote, wild tale. He agreed, though, after I contacted the reporter, he agreed that indeed he would talk to me if I would keep his anonymity intact. When I found out I was giving this presentation, I was able to recontact him. This sighting occurred in October of 1977, so that was some 13 years ago. And he agreed that I could release his name. I was concerned that that would, if this was the only report I have from Florida, that the individual requested to be kept unknown. I was afraid that would fire the enthusiasm of the skeptics. So I stopped that in its tracks. His name is Dale Gillen, and Dale told me I interviewed him right at the site. I was 3 days after the event occurred, and oftentimes I felt that if you were to get the individual back at the exact site, that in my job as memory, you'd get a better recollection of details than you might if you were to sit in a room somewhere. It was close by his house. It was only 2.5 miles from his house. So I interviewed him, and he, as I said, he was hitchhiking home, and in doing so, he had come up to a crossroads where one road butted into another and was turning and was trying to hitchhike down to his house that way, which was 2.5 miles away. And he was standing by the road sign, and it was about 9 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, he started hearing strange noises. That was the first indication that something unusual was going on. He described them as, quote, horrible, I'll tell you. They were weird, real weird. And I did my best in attempting to get him to describe these sounds because I find vocalizations very interesting and important. One thing I failed to ask him, and in retrospective, I wouldn't ask him now because it's too hazy in his own mind, I'm sure. But I failed to ask him if he thought it was perhaps verbalizing a thought. I wish I had now, but it's too late to go back and try now because I don't believe his memory would be as fresh as it was. Next, he smelled a very strong foul odor. This is a very common attribute of Bigfoot in Florida, and I believe it shows up significantly elsewhere in the country also. He said it smelled like something dead and garbage, kind of like mixed. That was his exact quote. He was standing there, and he had heard this weird series of sounds, and then this horrific stench overwhelmed him. And he became rather frightened. He then saw it in the headlights of the car coming from his back and going towards Bellevue. He was about 2 miles out, a mile and a half outside of Bellevue, a small town in North Florida. He saw it, and he described it as, it was great big, it was gigantic. That was his very words. He estimated at the time that he told me this that it was 10 feet tall. As we were standing there, I asked him to judge the height based on where he saw it. Now, he was standing next to the road sign, and across the road, and at an angle, if I was standing next to the road sign, he saw it right about over here. And it was across the road, just inside the tree line. There was the habitat there is xeric. It's a mixed turkey-oak pine. It isn't what I consider prime habitat for Florida Bigfoot. Prime habitat is hydrognetic, basically swamp areas and riparian forest and associated use of adjacent highlands as prime habitat. This wasn't principally what I would call prime habitat, but it was only approximately 1.5 miles from the lake. So Bigfoot can cover territory fast, so I don't consider that to be a problem. But he said that he saw it in the headlights of this car passing by, and he said it was gigantic. I asked him to estimate the height based on the Bigfoot's height as against the tree over there, and he picked out a small one. I say small because some trees were quite large. And we measured that afterwards, and it was around 8 foot 2, 8 foot 3 inches. So I would say that the Bigfoot was actually around 8 to 8.5 foot tall. After I talked to him a little bit, he became very frightened after he saw the Bigfoot. Standing up against the sign, he actually froze up against the sign. He said he was trying to blend into the sign as best he could. And somebody came along and picked him up. 2 guys came along and picked him up. He didn't even have his thumb out. He was standing like this, up against the sign, frozen with fear. And they picked him up, and he asked them if anything had been on the radio unusual. And he said that he had seen something, but he said he did not describe it in detail to them. He said, I used to be a little wary when I went out in the dark. Now I'm not going out in the dark at all. And I tend to think that he didn't after that. He was truly frightened, there's no doubt about it. After I interviewed him, at my suggestion for the skeptics, we crossed the road, and I wanted to see if there was any hair present. That was my first effort, or tracks. There happened to be deep leaf litter there, right at the area where it was seen standing, and I was unable to see anything in the way of any tracks whatsoever. And searching quite well, I was unable also to indicate, any hair. I looked far and wide and was unable to find hair. Again, in my suggestion, not his, I suggested that we go ahead and backtrack into the woods a ways. My hope was that I would find some sandy areas where I might find a track, or perhaps a two-wheel rut road through the woods that may have stepped in and progressing back towards wherever it was going after he had seen it. Track casts in Florida are relatively rare. Track sightings are a little less rare, but still rare. Not as common as here in the Pacific Northwest. In doing so, we traversed back and forth approximately 30 to 50 feet in at each cut. And on the fifth cut back, going back towards Bellevue, I broke into a small clearing. It was about 75 feet across and 35 to 45 feet wide. And I'm lucky I did. I just did barely break into it. If I'd have been 20 feet this way, I'd walk right by. We might not have made it on the next cutback. I don't know. In entering the clearing, I glanced to my right, and over here, quite a distance, but midline, basically, but onto one side, about 5 feet in from the trees on this side, I spied a tree. And it looked unusual, and I thought it was odd. And I decided I would go investigate further. And as I walked up, I became more and more excited because it became more and more unusual looking. In getting right up to it, I was elated. I recognized it immediately as a twisted tree. The literature source for that is Roger Patterson's book, The Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist. And I had read it some 4 years previous. Dale Gillen, the hitchhiker, was not particularly impressed with the tree at first. He looked at it, and I guess he thought maybe perhaps the wind had blown it over. I think maybe that's what he said. I can't remember, but I was excited. I wasn't paying much attention to it. But I happened to have a copy of Patterson's book with me. I took my briefcase and my camera whenever I went out on any sightings in hopes that maybe something would accrue that would necessitate their use. And so I took out the book, and I read the story to Dale Gillen. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the original citation, I'll read it now. And those of you who have read it long ago and have forgotten it, perhaps a refresher will help you. Now, this story was not original with Roger Patterson. It was a story from Sports Field magazine, and he took it out of there in 1963. So this first little portion is his introduction. In 1963, I read a very interesting story that was published in Sports Field magazine entitled Long Hunter, Alaskan Style by Russell Annabelle. The story is about Tex Cobb, a mountain man who spent years trapping in Canada and Alaska. The last half of the article reported. This is the story. The Dena Indian people liked him, Tex Cobb. No sentiment was wasted on either side. But he and the tribesmen had a live and let live understanding that was rare in those days. He stayed off their trap lines and they stayed off his. If an Indian had a salmon net in an eddy, Tex found another eddy and vice versa. Due to the fact that the Indians trusted him, we became involved one autumn with what today would be called, I suppose, an abominable snowman. I have since heard and read a great deal about the abominable snowman. I have seen the photographs of those tracks in the snow on a Tibetan mountain, and to me they are simply the tracks of a man with gunny sacking or some other cloth wrapped around his feet as protection from the cold, climbing slew-footed because the slope was steep and he had no crampons. But when I was a youngster roaming the north with Tex, we had never heard of the abominable snowman. We had, however, heard much about Galya, the shaggy cannibal giant, sometimes called the big man with the little hat. Our adventure with Galya occurred while we were camped in a pretty spruce park on Yellow Jacket Creek, south of Taiyuan Lake. We had spent the entire summer on this mountain-girt Nelchina Plateau, wandering about in aimless nomad fashion. Tex said we were prospecting and looking for fur sign. Maybe we were. He always had to have an excuse for enjoying the country, a commercial excuse if he could think of one. Anyway, it was now late September, the beautiful time, no mosquitoes, the land ablaze with color, the fish and the meat animals summer fat. The caribou horde gathering, and we were footloose and free as perhaps men can never be again. This morning Tex was making coffee, and I was down at the creek cleaning a mess of grayling for breakfast, when 6 Indians filed in through the timber. They stood a moment solemnly regarding our 4 horses. To them a horse was a rarity, a mysterious animal. They called him McKinley Moose, because McKinley was the only president they had ever heard of, and the horses were as big as moose. I followed them to the camp. "Have you eaten?" Tex asked them in dinner. They said they had eaten. Chief Stickman was with them. I had seen him once before at Aglutin village. A squat, square-faced man, very dark, with long hair and quick-moving obsidian eyes. He was the dinner boss of this entire area, and his reputation was bad. But now he had trouble that he couldn't handle. He told us about it, and as he talked, he kept standing first on one leg, then the other, balancing himself with the moccasined sole of the free foot against the knee of the supporting leg. I don't know whether it was a habit or a medicine trick to ward off evil spirits or both, but it was disconcerting. He'd come into this area 2 days ago, he said, with some of his people to kill and cache caribou for winter use. But they had discovered that Gallia, the shaggy giant, was hanging around. They had found his sign yesterday. And of course, everybody knew that Gallia wasn't interested in caribou. Gallia ate men. What kind of sign? Tex asked. We will take you to see it, Steenburg said. It is not far. After breakfast, we followed the Indians upstream a couple of miles to a burned flat on which a nurse crop of aspen and birch had grown. In the center of the flat stood a ruined birch sapling. It had been about 4 inches through and maybe 10 feet tall. Something had twisted the sapling as a man would twist a matchstick. The wood had separated into individual fibers. The bark hung in tatters. Steenburg and his hunters stood back while Tex and I looked the sight over. Moose often ride a sapling down to get at the tender upper twigs. So do caribou. But no moose or caribou had done this. This had been done by something with hands. It had happened yesterday because the leaves of the sapling had not yet completely wilted. It wasn't the work of lightning, no burns. A freak whirlwind hadn't done it because trees and brush a few yards distant were undamaged. The hard ground showed no tracks. We found no snagged hair in the brush. Absolutely nothing except the incredibly twisted birch sapling. It was without question the eeriest sight I ever beheld in the wild. Steenburg said, "It is Galliak's mark. We have seen it before." I wish to make clear that to the Dahinden people, Galliak was no legendary creature their grandfathers had told them about. He was a reality. And they spoke of him as they spoke of the bears and wolves. They saw his sign, and they saw him. He was a shaggy giant who wore a little hat and ate men. "We want to ask you to camp with us until we have killed our caribou," Steenburg said. "Galliak doesn't molest white men. Perhaps he will not molest us if you are in our camp." Steenburg had already told us that he was bivouacked on the shore of a pothole lake 2 hours to the eastward. Tex said all right, we would move to his camp in the morning. As he spoke, he was still looking at the twisted sapling, his green eyes narrowed in thought. I couldn't take my gaze off it either. Steenburg said, "Thanks, Cossack," a strange word of respect held over from the old Russian Cossack, and we parted company with the Indians. Next morning, I brought the horses in at daybreak. We ate, broke camp, and were putting on the packs. When here came the Indians, all of them, all that is except Steenburg. An old man told us that they were returning to their town on Tyone Lake. Steenburg was dead, he said. Galliak had taken him. The chief had got up in the night and gone down to the lake, perhaps for water. But nobody knew. A squaw with a birch bark torch found his red flannel underwear on the gravel beach. It had been torn off him. There may have been tracks, but the entire hunting party had swarmed over the beach, and by daylight no track on earth could have made sense of the jungle. Well, until the day of his own death last July, while on a sentimental journey to a fateful spot in Cook Inlet, Tex was convinced that the cannibal giant Galliak killed Steenburg. When asked if he believed in the existence of the abominable snowman, Tex would reply that he didn't think there were any around in Alaska nowadays, but that they had existed, at least one of them, a couple of decades back. This is good enough for me, I go along with it. And that's the end of that story. Now, there's a couple of points about this story I'd like to bring up and cover. One is that I don't believe that Galliak actually wore a little hat. I believe that this was a descriptive term to indicate two things, perhaps. One in particular, that Bigfoot appears to have a rather comical appearance to its head, so that if he were to wear a hat, it would be a small one. Secondarily, the head on a Bigfoot sometimes is described as a little bit small for the size of the body. So that may be the indication for the big man with the little hat. Indeed, there are no Dahinden people, Indians. The Dahinden is the name that all of the northern Athabascan Indian groups call themselves. And then the outgroups are who they name. So that you're really named by your outgroup neighbor. The Dahinden, they all call themselves the Dahinden. But in researching for this symposium here, I was able to find that the area that in Alaska that this sighting occurred, or this event occurred, is the homeland of the Otna Athapascan group. So the Dinah is just the people, and this is the case with all of the Athapascan groups, and they go all the way from Alaska to the eastern coast of Canada. Another point should be made is that the concept of Gaia, the shaggy giant, is common throughout the entire region. It is named by different names. One of the most common is Nakani. Bushman is the most common reference you'll find in the references. Brushman is another name. The only group of Athapascans that do not have a legend or an account or a narrative regarding a large giant creature that potentially is dangerous to humans is the Sarsi. The Sarsi are typically a Plains Indian culture, and I actually don't believe that Bigfoot ranges into their territory, which may well explain why they don't have a tradition thereof. I've got another quote here from Athapascan Adaptation, Hunters and Fishermen of the Subarctic Forest. This is by James Van Stone, and it's a book that was printed in 1974. He relates to the Bushman complex of beliefs throughout the Athapascan group. One of the most interesting and widespread quasi-religious concepts among northern Athapascans was the belief in the existence of a supernatural being, or boogeyman, sometimes called Bushman, Brushman, or Nakani. This was an evil spirit who could be identified as a man, or a monster who was half man and half animal. The Upper Tanana believed that such a creature lurked in the bush around camps during the summer months, awaiting a chance to steal children. Any unusual noise at night might be attributed to the Bushman, and most adults could tell of some frightening experience with the creature. The Kuchin believed the Nakani were numerous enough to form bands, and that their supernatural power permitted them to move about invisibly without the usual economic and logistic problems of the ordinary traveler. A belief in Bushmen has persisted down to the present time among many Athapascans. When I was conducting fieldwork in the mid-1960s among the snowdrift Chippewa, I was frequently told about such creatures who were said to roam the bush during the summer months, often coming close to the village. Mothers never hesitated to use the Bushman to frighten children to keep them from wandering. Informants told me how the Bushmen wore ordinary hard-soled shoes rather than moccasins, and therefore could be heard if seldom seen in the bush. Now there's another case there that I don't think we should literally interpret that as the Bushmen or Nakani wearing shoes. I think what the Indians are trying to say in their own way is that when Bigfoot moved through the forested areas, that it tended to make a fair amount of noise, that it would break branches that an Indian traveling through the area would not. Now I know there are those in the audience who believe that Bigfoot is essentially a gentle giant, that they pose no threat or danger or harm to man. At the risk of disagreeing with eminent authorities such as John Green and Dr. Krantz, I must say that the data tends to lead me to believe that this isn't necessarily the case. I think if we choose to ignore the native knowledge that has been acquired over thousands of years of experience with this creature, that we will not completely understand the Bigfoot phenomenon in all its ramifications. Now, because there's an abduction of a human in this particular case with the twisted tree, some people might say, if they believe those previous sources, that this article has no merit, or perhaps should be ignored. It's very interesting in that in 1978, an article was printed by Ellen Bassa. It's called The Enemy of Every Tribe, Bushman Images in Northern Athapascan Narratives. In it, she collected accounts of Bushman narratives. And she did not make the association or the connection between a possible real creature. She believed the Bushman narratives were quasi-legendary attempts to, secure order or anxiety attacks. There's all kinds of strange little psychological interpretations that people drift into if you don't believe in the existence of Bigfoot. If you do, then it becomes fairly easy. She gathered a total of 62 Bushman accounts in Athapascan narratives. 38 of those were collected by herself from the Mountain Mackenzie group of Athapascans. And she additionally collected 24 literature accounts. Now, she broke these down into various and sundry categories. And by adding up her theft of men, theft of women, and theft of children categories, you get fully 22 of the narrative accounts were of this nature. So 22 of 62 accounts were of that nature. This is 35% of her collected accounts. So I think if we ignore this material, we may be not understanding Bigfoot in totality. Now, when...
I'll tell you one thing, that she submitted, I happen to know her.
Yes.
And she submitted that paper to the previous conference, it was held 10 years ago in Vancouver, to that book, and they didn't want to publish it.
Well, I found in Florida that there's not a concerted effort to hush-hush. There is a concerted effort to hush-hush Bigfoot sightings to some degree. I have gone to police departments and requested information and been told flat out that no, we're not going to give you the information. But that's another story. Now, when I found out that my paper proposal had been accepted, I wanted to attempt, and I had not done it to this point, I wanted to attempt to confirm or to attempt to get some kind of backing and additional data in relationship to this original story as related by Russell Annabelle. And fortunately, the library research did pay off. I was able to do what I believe was quite significant work in a relatively short period of time. Now, if we can go to my slides, then we'll be all set. This is the area range map of the Athapascan people. As you can see, it stretches, except for the coastline of Alaska, all the way across the United States, northern Canada, to the eastern regions. The Sarsi, or the group that I told you, did not have this tradition, and they're right in here, and they're, as I said, a Plains tradition. This is the Atna group here. And that's the point that the Twisted Tree story originates from. May I have the next slide? This doesn't show up very well. My flash, I'm afraid, drowned it out a little bit. I don't know if any of you can see it, maybe the one in front can. There's Tyone Lake. And there's Tyone Village. Can you see it, anybody? You can confirm it? I was quite pleased to find that. Very pleased indeed. It turns out that Tyone Village was abandoned in the late 60s, early 70s. So it's no longer a habitation for humans. It took me 45 minutes to find that. It took me 40 minutes looking in the New York Times Atlas because they told me it was 150 miles north of Fairbanks. And it was 150 miles south of Fairbanks. I found that out in 5 minutes when I looked in the National Geographic Atlas. May I have the next slide? This area, this is also very light. This is Susitna Lake. It's a little bit out of focus. Tyone Lake is right up there and turns off this way. This is the area south of Tyone Lake. And there are numerous streams running through here, and only one or two are named. I realize that slide is virtually useless for most of you. Somewhere in this area, the original Twisted Tree account occurred. Next slide, please. This is a little bit better. Here's Tyone Village. This is Tyone Lake, and that's the Tyone River. This is the area south of Tyone Lake. And somewhere in that area is the origination point of the original story by Annabelle. Next slide, please. This is the anglicized term that shows up in Annabelle's story. Now, I had for years been pronouncing this as Gilead. And you'll notice as I read it, I pronounced it Galia. And I was able to do that because of information that I found. When I was reading the North American Indian Handbook on the Atma, I ran across this term here, which many of you probably already read as Dayuji, or something to that effect, which is what I read it as when I originally saw it. It's a phonemic transliteration there, and those terms mean a specific set of vocalizations. I glossed right over it. It was right next to a reference to Bushman, and it said that this was an abductor of children. Now, I decided I'd better find out how it really was pronounced. So I got the technical equivalence language portion of the handbook. And this is the non-technical transliteration. The X with a dot below it is KH. And this dot means that it's back velar. And back velar pronunciation is as far back on your soft palate as you can get. And it's guttural. So it's like ha, ha. Okay, this AY is I believe. This lambda sign, or I don't know what it's actually called, it looks a little like a lambda or an oversized V, with the dots, is another back velar sound. So it's at the back of your soft palate and it's a guttural sound. And its transliteration, non-technically, is GH. The E with the dot means it's an extended E. So as best I can tell, this is Kayake, 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 which I believe is cognate with Gaya, Gaya, Kayake. I believe that those two terms are the same. In addition, in Rigsby's paper, Bruce Rigsby had a paper called Some Pacific Northwest Native Language Names for the Sasquatch Phenomenon. And the Gippsland was the farthest group he surveyed. They're about 500 miles to the southeast of the island. And he came up with this name, Yedem Gililik. This is another guttural with a little Y. Gililik. These eyes are E. Gililik. And I believe that this is also cognate with Galia, because you would expect the consonants to stay roughly the same, and you would expect vowel drift. You see vowel drift in the Boukwas complex of names also. You see Pequas, Boukwas, Bakwas. So you have vowel drift. So I believe that this name, these names, and this name, this is Yedem, it means man. This means man of the woods, by the way. I believe that those three terms are actually connected. Next slide, please. This is the original report that led me to the hitchhikers. It was October 5th, 1977 in the Orlando Sentinel Star. Next slide. Now this is the actual area that Del Gillen was in. This is Bellevue here. And he was coming down this road and back up 25 here and was right at this intersection here, standing on this south side of the road when he saw the Bigfoot across the road. His home was right down in here. And it was up to the northeast side of the road that I found the twisted tree. As you can see, it's not too distant from the lake, about 1.5 miles. This is the Marshall Swamp up here, which is approximately 3 miles away. And it's a huge swamp. It's some 20 miles long by about 5 to 7 miles across, so it's a large area. Next slide. This is in North Florida, by the way, like the other one. This is a twisted tree. It's at a slightly different angle than I first saw it. I was back over this way a little more, and I was quite a bit further away. As you can see, the leaves are still hanging on this tree. And the destruction from this angle isn't as apparent. That's why I thought the tree was a little odd to start with. And when I got real close up, as you'll see in the subsequent slides, you'll see why I became more and more excited. In this slide, notice one thing. This branch here was dead. There was a tree right over here, about 4.5 feet away. And it's the only other damage in the area. And I believe that this tree was twisted back and forth like this. twisted back and forth, which caused all the fiber separation, the phloem and xylem fibers to disintegrate and lose contact with each other. Then the upper portion of the tree was twisted as it was pulled down. And I believe that this branch here, which originally was sticking out this way, was broken down by pulling down the upper portion of the tree. It was the only other damage to any tree in the area. Next slide, please. This is another slide showing myself. I'm 6'2". That gives you a bit of an idea on scale. The standing portion was 46 inches high. At the base, it was 5.5 by 4 3/4 in the other axis. So it was a significant sized tree. As you can see, the leaves are still hanging on. And there were no lightning burns. In my investigation of lightning trees, and I've investigated a half a dozen, almost invariably, there's a strip of bark that is popped off from the top of the tree to the base of the ground. This bark up here, above this point, there was no stripping. Some of the bark was missing. There's a few pieces. You can see them in the other photo. I believe this happened about 2 to 3 months prior to my finding. And I believe that in the interval time, lagomorphs or rodents, small rodents or something, carried off the portions of the bark to eat the cambium layer. Next slide, please. This shows a close-up again. You can see quite a bit of breaking up in here, in this axis. There's a big portion of it sitting loose. And this is the upper portion of the tree. There's a piece of bark that's still there, another small piece. And the upper portion of the tree, with the standing portion, made a total of 26 feet tall. This was an oak tree, a turkey oak tree. This is a turkey oak leaf. I have a couple of leaves I brought just to be certain when I left the site. I don't know if any of you are woodworkers out there, but oak is a very tough, dense, durable wood. It is really strong wood. I took apart some oak pallets to make some crab traps to go crabbing, stone crabbing on the Gulf Coast. And I can tell you from personal experience that oak is tough, dense wood. May I have the next slide, please? This is another shot showing a slightly different angle, showing the mass of the upper part of the tree and showing you the size of the tree. Next tree. Next slide, please. Sorry about that. Now this is one of the more important shots. This is Dahidenden's hand. As you can see right through this tree. Right there and right through here. This fiber destruction and delamination of the fibers was complete right through the tree. It bespeaks incredible strength, awesome strength, to be able to do this. If you'll try twisting a one inch branch of oak, you'll find out that indeed this is not easily done. There was no damage to this tree in the way of rot. Okay? This was not, some tree that wind came up and blew over because it was partly rotten or anything. This was a living tree when this was done.
Diseases?
There was no sign of disease whatsoever. Next slide. Now this is the shot. This is the standing portion of the tree here down. You're looking down the top portion of the tree. And it felt like it was very apparent that there was a 3/4 twist to the tree as it was pulled down. You can see it to a certain degree here by following the fissure crack lines here. So they follow them around and you can see that there was a twist to the upper portion of the tree. As you're looking here, it was twisted 3/4 clockwise. From the top of the tree looking back towards the base, it was counterclockwise. The wind wouldn't have done that if the wind would even have been able to affect this kind of damage to one tree alone out of a whole group. Next slide, please. This shows the other destruction. This is the area you're looking at down below that you can see through. Look at this. This is just totally destroyed. Just completely, all the fibers are separated. This one little portion here actually broke because it was twisted so much the fibers separated from the portion that it was down here. But if you can see in this group here, it's got a lot of spider webs on it. I didn't touch the tree except to take the photos and to just barely touch it for that one photo. This whole grouping here is all separated out as it goes up. And you'll notice that it's not cracked. And the only reason that one's cracked, I think, is because it was just twisted apart. If this was done by trying to pull it over this way, you would have gotten a single lateral crack, or at most two, and you would have had a single split separation. Not the tremendous damage that you see here evident. Next slide. This is a final shot from the other angle, and it shows this fissure line, crack line here. This tree was cracked right to the very base. Okay, we go back to this slide showing the most destruction. One back to. No, yeah, okay, that's it. No, that's it. There it is. There's several possibilities on this twisted tree as to what it is. I think the Indians are right. I believe it's a sign of Bigfoot, but what is it a sign of? One possibility is that it's a function of territoriality, that it's one Bigfoot telling another Bigfoot that this is the edge of my presumed territory. Presuming they're territorial, nobody knows. Another possibility is that it's an adjunct to mating. It's conceivable that a male or female Bigfoot might do this to a tree to effect a sign that they are in the area, to effect a mating that might not otherwise occur. Surely this kind of notice would last much longer than a urine scent with the associated pheromones, which would perhaps last no more than 5 days a week, depending on rain or whatever. There's also a slight possibility that it's food giving, a food gathering motive, but I highly discount that. I think that's almost not even worth considering. It seems to me as if the nutrient payback for the caloric output just wouldn't make it worthwhile. It seems like there would be senses. The cambium layer of the bark would not be worth going through that much effort for. And indeed, both the original twisted tree in Alaska and this twisted tree here were done during periods of ample food possibilities. This one was done, 3 months before October. The other one was done in October when caribou and other sources of nutrient resource were quite available. So I don't think we can put too much stock in the food gathering possibility. Now, I believe this is actually a cultural attribute of Bigfoot, and I know that will raise the hackles of a few people out there. But it is a rather complex event, and it happens some 3,600 miles apart as the crow flies, or perhaps we should say the horned grebe, since the horned grebe does fly between Alaska and Florida. It seems to me that it's so basic and important an act as reproduction is not an instinctive behavior in anthropoid apes and man, that, and it is not, that it seems unlikely that something of this nature would be instinctive, because the reproductive drive is so critical to the continuation of the species. Obviously, the same kind of event took place some 45 years apart and some 3,600 miles apart. And in order for it to do that, they must have a common source at one point in time. Who knows how far back? I personally think that Bigfoot probably got to North America prior to any of the human groups, because I believe Bigfoot got here based on its superior physical capabilities rather than needing a cultural apparatus to sustain it in the transition from the old world to the new. And the next slide, please. Oh, this is what I got back when I did the. I didn't want to send out the film that I took of the twisted tree. I thought it was too valuable, so I had it done locally. And I got this back. It says strange film. They have the next slide. This is a map of Florida, and a little out of focus. Can you tweak it one way or the other? I don't know if it's out of focus in the original. Yeah, there, a little bit back. Or there, that's good. This shows the entire state and the peninsula area would be attached up there. This is a map prepared for the Army Corps of Engineers, which shows the or purports to show the wetlands of Florida. It all of the light green and the dark green are wetlands, and the blue are the lakes. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of what I consider to be the principal habitat of Bigfoot in Florida. The swamplands and the associated bottomwoods, bottom hardwoods to streams and rivers are principal habitat, as well as the margins of lakes. Florida has a lot of lakes. The majority of the population in Florida lives along the coastline. 80% of the people live within 10 miles of the coast. So this area here, all the way up, is very heavily populated. This area is heavily populated, and there are population centers up in this area. It still leaves a lot of territory for Bigfoot. As you can see, this is just a huge complex of the Everglades and Big Cypress Swamp. There are additional large swamp areas. This used to be much more of a swamp here. This is the Kissimmee River, and the Army Corps of Engineers channelized it, which means they cut a ditch right down the whole length of it, which destroyed the habitat for the benefit of a few farmers and ranchers on either side to give them a few additional square miles of territory. It also helped destroy Lake Okeechobee, which is in the process of being destroyed by the eutrophication because of the runoff from the system up here not being filtered through the marshlands or the wetlands that were destroyed. That's why I take this map with a grain of salt, because it was prepared for the Army Corps of Engineers, and they particularly like wetlands. The U.S. Geological Survey, you can't see it here, but on the original map, it said over here in small print that this whole area in here is basically swamp. There's a few islands of higher land. An island in this area, in this whole area, an island is like 2 feet above the prevailing elevation, and you'll have oak trees and pine on it. The rest will be cypress and dwarf cypress, cypress sloughs, and large prairies of dwarf or stunted cypress. But there's a significant amount more of swampland than actually shows on this map. We have the next slide, please. This shows in a little better detail. Perhaps you can see a little better. The Twisted Tree account occurred right here. This is the Marshall Swamp area. This entire area is dotted with lots of little lakes. A lot of little lakes don't show up on this map that are there. I did a study attempting to assess whether Bergman's rule would apply to Bigfoot in Florida. And I broke the state in half. Basically here at Tampa. From here down is south, from here up is north. One point I should make. I have a sighting right in here. This whole area, I have a single sighting. But I assure you there are Bigfoot there. I have no doubt at all. Because there are Bigfoot reported from Alabama, there are Bigfoot reported from Mississippi, there are Bigfoot reported from Louisiana. The simple fact is that there's nothing in there. There's no researchers. There's little teeny tiny towns. If somebody saw Bigfoot, they tell their neighbor, and that's probably as far as it goes. It simply doesn't travel the information. There's only one town of any size, and that's Tallahassee. And it's up in the Highlands. So the stories might not even reach there. At any rate, I collected the sighting reports that had a size estimate. And indeed, this is a little bit touch and go, because size estimates, I believe, are a fairly good estimator of what's actually happening, but they're not readily assessed as to their validity. I think a track length is a much more important indicator of actual stature. And as I said, track casts and tracks are relatively uncommon in Florida. I do have one report here in the Ocala National Forest, right here in this area, of track casts back in 1980. And they were quite good, and they indicated a Bigfoot of 8 foot 8 inches. At any rate, I totaled up all of the northern Florida sightings that had an estimate of height, and a lot of them didn't. And I got a number of 22. And the average height was 7 foot 8.5 inches. We go to the next slide, please. Then I did the same for southern Florida. And I had a total number of 19 that had a site estimate with the sighting report. And I got 7 foot 3.5 inches. Now, I don't know if this is valid or not, but that's a significant difference, perhaps. I'm not a statistician, so I can't really say. But it's 7 foot 3.5 inches in the southern part of the state. It's 7 foot 8.5 inches in the northern part of the state. And it's interesting in that regard that Florida as a whole is 7 foot 6 inches. And George Gill's report, The Population Climbs of the Sasquatch, indicated that California was 7 foot 4 inches. Oregon was 8 foot 0. Washington was 8 foot 4 inches. And Western Canada was 8 foot 8 inches. Bergman's rule states that the farther north you go in latitude or a colder climate that you would have a corresponding increase in volume of the body of mammalian systems, not ectotherms, but only endotherms. So it's interesting that the 7 foot 4 and the 7 foot 6 for California, both being quasi-temperate areas, perhaps Florida's a little more temperate, although it does get quite cold. I've seen it snow in northern Florida. It seems that those are quite close, and it does look as if the data falls into place in that regard. I should mention that down here is where the key deer occur. You might have heard of it on Big Pine Key. The deer in Florida follow Bergman's rule completely. In North Florida, that's where all your deer records come from, trophy deer, and all in North Florida. You get further and further south, and they get smaller and smaller, right down to the key deer, which are, you know, they're this big, they're little tiny things. The mainland deer are relatively small also, a little bit bigger than key deer. I used to hunt deer here off the 50 Mile Bend in the eastern edge of Big Cypress Swamp. We had a common running joke that you had to look 3 times before you shot your deer to make sure you weren't shooting one of your hound dogs. Okay, lights off, slides off, lights up. There's a couple of points I'd like to close with. One is what are the ramifications when Bigfoot is proved to exist, and I want to emphasize when, because I don't doubt they exist myself. I have no doubt whatsoever. And I believe that they will be proved to exist. I hope most of us here live to see that day. Wetlands habitat protection is one of the resultants of when Bigfoot is proved to exist. All of the lands east of the Rockies are at risk at this point because of wetlands destruction. There's been a tremendous amount of wetlands destructions in the last 15 to 20 years. A lot of it is occurring along the riparian forests in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. A great deal of it has occurred in Florida. We've lost a great deal of wetlands. The state of Florida is attempting to reverse this trend. There are now laws on the books to protect mangrove forests. There are now laws on the books to protect wetlands. I believe that this needs to be a prime portion of the effort to protect habitat for Bigfoot when they are recognized to exist by science as a whole. There's one other point that may be impacting Bigfoot already. It may be quite significant. I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody will know. Perhaps someday we can tell. And that's herbicide usage. Much of the land that I showed you in the North Florida map, the swampland is managed for pulpwood. It's owned by timber companies and managed for pulpwood for paper production. And when they go in and clear cut an area of pine, they go back in and reforest. And to keep hardwood competition down in the growing of the conifer that they're after, the softwood pine that they're after, they utilize 2,4-D and 4,5-P, or Silvex, which is a mixture of the two. They do this, as far as I know. I don't know if they're still doing this in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if anybody out there would know. But as far as I know, this came to attention because it was also being done in the Pacific Northwest. And these compounds are abortifacients. They cause spontaneous abortions in humans. And it may well be that because humans are morphologically extraordinarily similar to Bigfoot, and may well be, not proved yet, but may well be closely phylogenetically related, it may well be that indeed it would cause spontaneous abortions in Bigfoot. They get their water source out of flowing streams. They drink out of streams. They eat plant materials as well as animal materials, but they're eating plant materials that are perhaps sprayed. It's a little bit worrisome in that some of John Green's work tends to indicate that there are more sightings of young Bigfoot in Western Canada than there are in the Pacific Northwest. whether this is just a fluke or whether this is a function of this kind of workings by the forestry industry and silviculture, I don't know. But I think it's something that needs to be investigated. In conclusion, I'd like to say that I believe that the twisted tree is information and data of a high order and evidence that I believe goes and helps along with other data to prove the existence of Bigfoot. And that field researchers in other parts of the country should be aware, since the two original sources are so far apart in time and space, that they should be aware that this is a possibility in their area of research also. Thank you.
Scheduled, so let's hold off questions probably, or if we get ahead of schedule, we can bring it back. First, I have two very small announcements.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.